Thank you for coming. Thank you for inviting me here today. My name's Joey Moya. I'm the Clerk of Court and Chief Counsel for the New Mexico Supreme Court. I'm here today to talk about court reports, rules, and forms. It says setting the pace for state courts. I'm not sure what that means. If any of you have seen me move, you know I'm not setting the pace for anyone, but I will try my best. I think really what I'm here today is to emphasize and reinforce the message that you've already heard this morning about the importance and value of the legal research tools that the New Mexico Compilation Commission provides to you. I'm going to focus on opinions, the court's rules and forms. As the clerk and as the court's clerk and chief counsel, I have the responsibility and, believe it or not, true pleasure to help with the distribution of the court's opinions, both the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court's appellate opinions, as well as the court's rulemaking. And in that role, I've had the opportunity to work very closely with the Compilation Commission over the years, because as you know and as you've heard, they are the official legal publisher for the courts and for the legislature. The Compilation Commission has been around for a long, long time and has provided that service, if you will, to the court for its opinions for a long time. Justice Chavez talked a little bit about the history of the Compilation Commission, and I won't get into much more detail, but I do want to touch again on a couple of things that he mentioned. A little over 3 years ago, I guess, as I view it, everything changed about the way that we publish opinions for the New Mexico's appellate courts. The change was approved by the court. The purpose was, as I see it, twofold. One, to provide greater public access and transparency to the court's opinions, and the other was to provide a more useful and efficient method for the bench and the bar to have access to and cite to the court's opinions. So at that time, the court entered an order and made changes to the appellate rules that made the electronic digital version of the opinion the official opinion for the court. Simultaneously with that, we also implemented virtually real-time publishing of the Supreme Court opinions. When they are filed in the clerk's office, they are essentially posted on the Compilation Commission's website at the same time. But with those two innovations, we're talking about kind of two ends of the opinion process. And that's, at least with regard to opinions today, is what I want to focus on and emphasize to you the importance of using the Compilation Commission's resources to make sure that you're aware of the most current New Mexico appellate court opinions. Now, when I say we started back in March of 2012 with real-time publishing of opinions. What I'm really referencing are the slip opinions issued by the New Mexico Supreme Court. What we do now is on Mondays and Thursdays of every week, the court publishes its opinions at 11 o'clock. At that same time, the Compilation Commission is posting the slip opinion, what we refer to as the slip opinion, on the Compilation Commission website. If you're on the court's email notification list, you've probably received an email or two from me letting you know that an opinion by the court has been filed on that day. That's referencing the court's slip opinion. Now that's just the start of the process and the first half of the innovation that we started in March of 2012 and completed in July of 2013, when we also implemented and made available the complete retrospective uniform body of case law in New Mexico going back to 1852 that now had the court's official citation on every court opinion and had every paragraph in all 11,200, was it, of those opinions numbered. So now that is available on the Commission's website and in OneSource. On the Commission's website, of course, it's free to the public for public access. On the OneSource product, a much more powerful and word searchable legal research tool that you can use. Now, when the court's slip opinion is issued, that is the first step in the process. You've also heard the second half of the innovation, if you will, or the transformation in appellate opinion publication referenced to the authenticated PDF with a digital signature. That's issued by the New Mexico Compilation Commission at the end of the process, and that's referencing the final court opinion that is released for publication at the end. It's not the slip opinion. And so when that slip opinion is filed, whether it's a Court of Appeals opinion or a Supreme Court opinion, that's just the start of the process, as I think you're all probably aware of. In the Court of Appeals, of course, once that slip opinion is filed, there's the rehearing process, which at least is a 15-day process to file rehearing. If one is filed, that can go on for some time. If a rehearing isn't filed, then perhaps the cert process will be invoked by one of the parties in that case. Once the cert process is complete in the Supreme Court, being either cert was denied, cert was granted, or no cert was applied for, then that Court of Appeals opinion is eligible for release as a final releasable precedential opinion. It's at that time that our office, the clerk's office, gives it its official site, the 2015 NMCA dash whatever the next sequence in the number is for Court of Appeals opinions. Those opinions are issued every Tuesday morning. The released opinions are issued by the Compilation Commission upon direction from the clerk's office with the official citation. I think you can see, if we go here, we have today's Tuesday morning. That's when they're released. And we have some that are up today that were released today. This is the only place that you'll find that right now. Later today, the other legal publishers will start to pick that up, I think, and it'll be generally available. But the most current is right here, right now. What happens between the slip and between this process here, say for a Court of Appeals opinion, is the possibility of changes to that slip opinion before it gets to the release. It can be for simple typographical errors that the court notices, that one of the attorneys on the case notices, that the general public notices, that could be corrected during that, what I would call the post-slip opinion stage. Or it could be that a motion for rehearing was filed and the opinion was altered in some way, or maybe even withdrawn and substituted with a new opinion. That whole process has to play itself out before the final released opinion for publication is posted on the Commission's website and appears in OneSource. And it's that currency that I am here to emphasize to you, not just for the Court of Appeals opinions, although that's the largest number, but also for the Supreme Court opinions. We follow the same approach there. Of course, we don't have the same cert process that we have to think about in the Supreme Court. But again, when the court files its opinion, that filing day on a Monday or a Thursday at 11 o'clock, that's the slip opinion. And then again, we have that rehearing and correction process that can go on for 15 days or longer. And at any time during that period of time, the court can approve revisions to the opinion. It can decide to withdraw its opinion and substitute a new one in its place. And until that final release on some Tuesday morning, that opinion is not final, and you don't know if the opinion that you saw as a slip is really the current and final precedential opinion. So I think it's critically important to be aware of that process. I think most attorneys are, but some are not. When you get the emails from the court with the opinion, that's the slip opinion. We purposely link directly to the PDF of the opinion on the slip opinion portion of the website, because once that opinion is released, formally released and given its official site, it's taken down from that page on the Commission's website, and now it's part of the New Mexico Appellate Reports, and it goes into OneSource. So if you try to click that link, once it's been officially removed and made an official opinion, you won't see it anymore. And that's intentional so that you are not looking at and relying on an opinion that might have changed during that rehearing and correction and release process. It's a very short time usually, but a very important time. Frankly, most of the time nothing changes, or it might be a minor typo that doesn't make any difference. And if it's really truly substantive, probably what's going to happen is the court's going to explicitly withdraw the prior slip opinion and substitute it with a new one so it's there for everyone to see. But sometimes there can be changes in the middle, or depending on how you're accessing your case law, you might not know if that opinion has changed from when it was first filed to when we gave it its official cite and it goes into OneSource and goes into the New Mexico Appellate Reports. So if there's one thing that I wanted you to take away from this, it's to keep that process in mind and to remember that when you're citing your opinions and your pleadings and your briefs and your court documents, the last thing you do is just to make sure you check one of the tools that the Compilation Commission provides to you to make sure that you're citing the most recent opinion from either the Supreme Court or the Court of Appeals. The next thing I wanted to move on to is the court's rulemaking function. Again, this is a process that's developed over time. You probably get a lot of emails from me regarding the court's rulemaking function. And about 2 or 3 years ago now, I guess, the court changed the way that it schedules its rulemaking activity every year. It used to be that the court would just change rules whenever one was ready to be approved by the court. We have a very active committee process. I see people here in the audience today who volunteer on those committees. A great deal of work goes into all of that. That eventually all gets submitted to the court for recommendation to approve. Back before we moved to the process we have now, those rules would just be approved serially whenever they were ready and would be announced to the bench and the bar. We received feedback that that was a bit confusing, could be a bit overwhelming to have this constant, steady stream of rulemaking. So a few years ago, the court moved to a scheduled rulemaking system where most rule amendments are approved at the end of every year, unless the court finds exceptional circumstances and needs to approve something out of cycle, but most of them are at the end of the year. But whether it's the out of cycle process or whether it's the year-end process, the court works very closely, again, with the Compilation Commission on the final approved rule amendments that are distributed to the public and to the bench and to the bar. And I wanted to point out to you again kind of some of those in-between periods that could trip you up if you're not really focused on them, and depending on which electronic resource you might quickly access at any given time just to see what a rule says. Maybe you're looking to figure out what's the next step in your case or whatever it might be. But because of the way that court rules are adopted and distributed every year, you have to be careful that what you're looking at is actually the current and effective rule for you at that time. And you might also want to know, you might want to be looking ahead to after the first of the year and know what's coming. The way that the process works is this. After the court approves its rule amendments, and we'll stick right now with the year-end rule amendments, they are essentially all approved on November 1st of each year. So we just completed that cycle. All of those approved rule amendments are transferred to the Compilation Commission, who then takes them and formats them in the version that you see in OneSource and on this page first. This, as you see, is the recently approved rule changes. The way that it works is in OneSource, you go to OneSource, you see the rule that is in effect right now. No question about it. Because we have such a close integration between the Commission and the court, you can be assured that when you go to OneSource, the rule that you're seeing there is the rule that's in effect that day. But it could be changing. And if you want to see what's coming, this is the page, well, it's moved now, but so that's okay, Brad. But the page that was here a second ago, the recently approved rule amendments page, is where you can go to see the rules that have been approved but have not gone into effect yet. So you can see right now we have a whole bunch of them because we are at the year-end rule cycle. All of those rules, or most of them anyway, go into effect December 31 of this year. On that day, all of those rules will go into OneSource. Whatever was superseded by the amendments will be removed from OneSource. And so you know, again, by going to OneSource, that you have the current rule. No question about it. The recently approved rule amendment page, those will stay there until the next hardbound volume of the NMRA, the red book that's over there, is published, and that's usually sometime in the spring. And so everything that essentially that was approved November 1 will make it in to the next version, the 2016 version, if you will, of the NMRA. At that point, once all of those approved amendments go into that hardbound volume, then they'll come off of this page here. And all that will be left on this page is anything that was approved by the court after that went out for publication. There should be very little to nothing there at the beginning, and really very little to nothing for the rest of the year because of the way that the court's moved its rulemaking to kind of just a once-a-year process for the approval of rule amendments. But again, it's very, very important to keep in mind that difference, because sometimes if you're not careful, you don't know whether you're looking at the rule, or if you don't pay attention to the history note, or depending on which version you access electronically from whatever legal publisher, you might not know if you've got the current rule that's in effect. You might not know what's coming up tomorrow and think that what's today is still going to be tomorrow. These are the two tools that you can use to be sure that you know what's in effect today and what will be in effect tomorrow. The last thing I wanted to touch on is the forms. I think of it's a small thing, but I think a useful and important thing. I think of the forms, and they are just part of the NMRA, so they're part of the whole rulemaking function and everything that I just told you. But one of the nice features in OneSource with the forms is that they are offered, in addition to being assured that when you go there you're seeing what's current, is that they're offered in multiple formats. Forms obviously are useful because they can be filled in and altered if appropriate or whatever. And when you go to these forms, they're offered in multiple formats, in Word, WordPerfect, rich text format, and PDF. And I think that's a great feature. You won't find it very many places, and so I just like to highlight that for folks. And the one last thing that I wanted to point out with regard to rulemaking, Brad, if we could, I'm sorry, I'm going too fast for you here. I'd like, as soon as that's done opening, so you can see there you've got a form that you can then tailor to suit your particular case. If we go back to the recently approved rule amendments page, I want to just point out a couple of other things on that page. You can go ahead and click on any one of those. There's two things in addition that I just wanted to point out this table, and many of you might be familiar with it, but if not, I want to be sure that you are. You'll see the final rule column there, the rule number, of course, and then the title of the rule. And that final rule column, if you were to click that, you would get a clean version of what that rule is going to look like when it becomes effective. And there you go. Also on that page, on that table, is a redline version. If it's not a brand new rule, but a rule that's being amended from a previous version, you can click that redline rule, that redline PDF, and you can see and strike out and underline what specifically was changed. That can be hugely helpful if it's a rule that has lots of changes to it, or even just a few and they seem buried in there somewhere. That, at a glance, you can quickly focus in on what's changed. The last thing on that table page that I wanted to point out that's available, we get a lot of calls for this at the clerk's office, and so I like to point out that it's available here, but for a short time only, are the orders. If you see the order number, below that are the Supreme Court orders that actually approved the rule amendments. And for whatever reason, I think people are having to prove that that's the rule and the court actually approved it, and they want the order so they can show the judge or whatever, and you have access to it there also off of that page. And I find that just really helpful and encourage you to, if you ever need an order, think of going there first before calling our poor overworked clerks, although they're always happy to help. The last thing, and you won't see it here because this actual page here is for civil rules, but those last, well, you'll see the effective date column. So you see here we've got several rules. We have one that was effective July 1st, one that was effective November 18th, or two actually, and then two December 31st. So all of those were approved by the court after the 2015 NMRA came out. So that's why it's still there. That's why they're all still there. As soon as that comes out, all those will go away. If any of those had been a form, then those last two columns is also another place where you can access the editable version of the forms that I just mentioned. Those are really the key features that I wanted to point out, and I just wanted to emphasize the little cracks and crevices in the way that rules are approved and that the way that opinions make their way from slip to final release. It's kind of like the Schoolhouse Rock, how does a bill become a law? It's sort of that kind of thing. And if you don't know, oftentimes it doesn't matter. You find it, you find the right thing, but on that important case at that critical time, it can really matter. And I think it's helpful to have this information, and you can be assured that if you're using the Commission's legal research tools, that you've got the correct, the accurate, and the current. Thank you all very much.